So I think as men or as humans even, right? Like we do this a lot where we have a goal, we really want something to happen relationally, but sometimes the exact opposite is what happens. But if nobody tells you that, right? If nobody tells you that, you're going to keep doing the thing that doesn't work.
Right.
And then no wonder a lot of men end up feeling very lonely and disconnected and confused about their relationships because they never got that feedback as to what they're doing is not actually working. It's not getting them what they want.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name is Michael Seeley, and my guest today is Marc Azoulay. He's the founder of Men's Therapy Online. It's an incredible resource for men. It's a therapy center, groups for men, excursions for men. He's really passionate about men's mental health. He's an expert on it, and it's a passion of mine as well, men's mental health. So today you're going to get a couple of therapists talking about men's mental health, real talk. Marc's style is really direct and honest, and it's a really engaging conversation. I think you're going to love the episode today with Marc Azoulay. Marc, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, really excited to talk to you. I was looking at your website, and there's such good stuff there, and it really resonated with me, especially the work that you do with groups and retreats and things like that, and that I think is really valuable and something that more men could benefit from. But I want to get started in the podcast with just asking you how you got into the field of mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to tell my story. And yeah, I
Yeah.
like our website. We're very different from a typical therapist website. We have like,
Yes.
a big demon on the front. It's a very
Yes.
like Dungeons and Dragons heavy metal type theme,
Yes.
versus you see so many therapists with like, a sunrise or
Right.
that picture of like the rock hitting the lake and all the,
Right.
ripples coming out.
Yes. Yes.
We're really trying to tailor it like for men, right? For masculine presenting
Yeah.
dudes. And I think we attract that
Yeah.
type of people. But for me, it kind of, dovetails nicely is growing up, I was a nerd, right? So like I was into Dungeons and Dragons, still am, magic
Yeah.
cards, like computer games. Like I was a complete dweeb. I was a young Jewish kid growing up in rural Maryland. So I got the shit kicked out of me all the time. I got bullied almost constantly. Where I grew up, a lot of the guys were, big sports guys. A lot of them ended up going to the military. And, now I like those guys. I can get along with them. But growing up, it was actually quite difficult. I didn't have, a group of guys or male role models that were able to shepherd me and have those kind of, fireside chats that you think about of like, an older guy sitting around a campfire telling you, what it means to be a man or helping. So I was pretty isolated growing up. So what that culminated in, after all those bullying and, also some tough times at home with my parents, I went to college and did what a lot of young men do, which is I reinvented myself, and I reinvented myself as to like what an 18-year-old thinks is cool, which is, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So I just like became this like punk rocker, raver archetype guy, right? I started doing drugs. I tried to get laid as much as possible. And I really fell into this idea of like, toxic masculinity where I would never say no to anything because I don't want to be seen as like a, right? So when people were like, oh yeah, you want to do this? I was like, oh yeah, and like, oh, you want to, ask this girl out? I was like, yes, you want to go to this like dangerous place? Yes. You want to steal from the grocery store? Yes. Like I would always say yes. I was too insecure and afraid to ever say no to anything. And like I'm saying, underneath it, I was just this dork. I'm still a nerd. So like it was really, really out of my comfort zone.
Uh-huh.
So I ended up really like spiking fast and crashing hard. Culminated with an overdose, in the summer of my junior year of college, which then got me into therapy. And I started kind of doing this work as a client.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's the case for a lot of us is that we maybe experience therapy for the first time, going through some trials and tribulations. And in that journey, it inspires us to help other people. It's interesting when you mentioned like being bullied and growing up and seeing all these sort of, macho sports dudes. And if you're a nerd, Dungeons and Dragons, you're an easy target. And similarly, like when I was like middle school, I was a little more on the small side, like physical stature, so experienced a little bit of bullying. And what got me kind of out of that was sports, right? But there are some traps in there as well. And I burned out in that and kind of went through some dark times as well. But, and I just think that's a similar story for a lot of men who are therapists, is they may have experienced some sort of dark times and they hopefully had a good experience in therapy that helped them get out of that. It sounds like that was the case for you. Did you have a like a good therapist that kind of helped you, or was it a bad experience or a good experience?
Uh,
The
Both.
therapy.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so my first therapist was a DBT therapist from the College Counseling Center
Uh-huh.
and a female therapist, and it did not vibe at all.
Mm.
So, I went in there, I was upset again. I was coming off of a drug overdose, right? I was like very upset, knew I was living a lie, knew my life was not functioning at all. I kind of fell into, yeah, maybe somewhat trapped with sports where it's all about performance. Like I was getting good grades in school. And basically, because I was immature, my thought was, well, if I'm getting good grades, I can do whatever else I want on the, back end. My only, obligation to my parents and to life is just to get good grades, and then I'm free, any other time. So that just made this like really weird double life that I was living.
Yeah.
Well, so I went to this therapist, and she's sitting there and she's like going through the DBT curriculum, dialectical behavioral therapy for the
Right.
listeners, right? It's a very
Yes.
structured way of doing therapy. And she's like giving me, worksheets, and doing psychoeducation. And looking back, I mean, she was probably an intern that was working at the College Counseling Center, probably a recent grad. So, she's just somebody who was just following the book. And maybe I was one of her first clients, so I don't, hold anything against her. But at the time, it really rubbed me the wrong way. And I remember like yelling at her in therapy, being like, I don't want more homework. Like, I need you to help me. I need you to listen to me. Where I felt like that type of therapy was very dehumanizing. I felt like I was just being put through this cog and, being this kind of fake punk rocker, I hated the man and the machine and all that kind of stuff. So I hated it. So I worked with her for about, I don't know, call it 6, 8 weeks. Stopped working with her, and then one of my good friends at the time, it was the best friend of the girl I was dating actually, said, hey, I'm seeing this other guy, I'm seeing a therapist. He works really differently, you should go see him. So I worked with the first male therapist, and he was a eco-psychologist. So his room was like full of plants. He used a lot of like nature and animal metaphors. He did a lot of depth psychology, a lot of this like mythopoetic stuff, which is like, based on mythology and story. And I don't remember really anything he said, but I remember that he gave a shit, and he
Yeah.
gave a shit in a way that my parents, I think they loved me. I don't think my parents didn't love me, but I wasn't able to take in their love in the way that I was able to take in, the love and care from this man. His name was Dr. Jeff
Yeah.
Byer. That really just healed me. I mean, that really just started me on this path and gave me a lot of that masculine mentorship that I really needed. And
Yeah.
back to what you were saying about, I think, sports and about young men is like, I really don't think there's a lot of older men that are able to engage emotionally and guide the youth in a way that I think we really need, or I needed. It sounds like you needed, just someone to like look out for us and say, hey, here's what I did. Here's what you should do. Like just kind of just, I don't know, getting attention in a way, getting like that masculine love and attention. I feel like I didn't get enough of that. So I got really lost really fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I had my parents were going through a divorce when I was getting
Yeah.
into bicycle racing, my sport, and the sport was really, really helpful. But at the same time, I had a really good therapist when I was 15. Perfect timing. I was kind of getting into trouble. I was a punk rocker too, by the way. So I
Oh,
can relate
nice.
to, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Saw some great shows, had a lot of fun with that, but that was kind of edgy. And I knew some friends who were getting into drugs, and I had the sports, fortunately, that kind of kept me on the straight line there. But I was kind of getting into trouble, and I got assigned to a social worker, this male therapist who was probably in his late 40s at the time, and I was like 15. And it was this wonderful, perfect match. Like, I don't know how this happened, the stars aligned, but he was, yeah, no BS, wasn't like clinical or cold, would just kind of like, he would curse. He was real. And I really bond and related to him. And so that was a great experience. His name was Gary. And yeah, I think there is, just thinking about like the modern family and how people are so stressed these days, and parents can kind of check out, really actually have good intentions for their kids, but maybe be checked out in a certain way and not fully present. And like you're saying, we are missing a lot of these sort of male figures who are getting involved with youth, or even men in their 20s. I think that's missing. And it sounds like you had this good experience with this one particular therapist. And thinking about your business today, you do a lot of groups. Was there personal experience you had where you had like in a group therapy situation, or like a retreat or something like that?
Oh yeah, totally. So it's kind of the other end of the spectrum. So I had like kind of the therapy stuff with
Yeah.
Dr. Pyer, and then I was actually meeting with one of my professors, Dr. Patricia Carpenter. She's since passed, but she taught a class for upper education psychology, which was called Eastern and Western Approaches to Mind and Body. So it was about meditation, it was about acupuncture, it was about energy work. It was basically like applying neuroscience to these more Eastern philosophies, right?
Yeah.
And I went to her office hours for 3 years. So
Wow.
I talked with her every week for 3 years. She was,
Okay.
a tenured professor. She was in her, 80s at the time, and she's had these office hours. I just went, and she was like my second therapist. So, where Jeff was my surrogate father, she was very much my surrogate mother. And, following that, she encouraged me to go to some meditation retreats. And that was kind of my first, retreat type intensive work experience. I went to the Allegheny Zen Center. I went to school in Pittsburgh. So I went to the Allegheny Zen Center. I did a Datun, which is like 3 months basically of meditation. And what I don't know, either stupid or unconscious, you got to be sober during that. Turns out you can't bring drugs into the Zen Center.
Really?
But I didn't really like think of that, I didn't
Yeah.
think of that. So I went through like detox. So I went through like withdrawal and detox basically during my stay at the Zen Center. And that was kind of my like rehab experience, very non-traditional rehab experience.
Yeah.
There. And with that, there was a lot of groups, there was a lot of conversation. You also got involved in AA for a few years, and a lot of those, I think of all the kind of therapy things, that's like the most male dominated one. I think guys go to, the recovery rooms. So I met a lot of men through that. And there was just a lot of benefit in just hearing other men speak emotionally, really. Because my dad's wonderful. Was one of my heroes. We're really, really close. But he doesn't have that emotional depth, or he has it, just hard to access it. Kind of back to the point where you're saying of lack of mentors is, both my parents are immigrants, and they really had to work hard and be very, focused on logistics and finances and safety and just creating a container for me and my sister to grow up, which I will always be grateful for. And because of that, hyper specialization, the emotional intelligence just wasn't there, Right. So they had kids that had higher emotional needs that I don't think they were quite able to meet at the time. But I was luckily able to find those outside of my family with some of these other mentors that I'm talking about.
That's so cool. Yeah, I'd never have ever gone to like a men's retreat, and this is one of my areas of like my discomfort zone. So I'm excited to be talking to you about this because I've heard so many great things from fellow therapists, male therapists that I know. It's like, oh, you got to try retreats and groups, but I find them daunting in facilitation. Number one, like if I were to do them, and then also going to them, right? Like I would be a little bit fearful, like, is it going to be a good match? Is there going to be like one guy there who sucks the oxygen out of the group? Like I have all these sort of fears of even just trying it. And so I want to ask you, like, what do you think makes a good group setting, or just like a good facilitated group for men?
Yeah. So on the topic of retreats, right? Like, we run them for my company. I can talk about that. And we also talk offline if you're interested in just like learning how I do it. It's all open source. But I would recommend the Mankind Project. So I did their retreat, about 6 years ago, I think now. And they're one of the biggest men's organizations out there. So I recommend for you and other listeners, like they do something called the Warrior Weekend, which is it's been around since like the 80s. So it's like very dialed in. They run it in almost every state you can think of multiple times a year. It's like very, very ubiquitous. Their after programs can be hit or miss, kind of as we talk about groups, because, we talked a little bit before the show, is like, you don't really know who's in them. You don't know what the facilitators are, because their organization is so large. They don't train therapists, right? They have like a certification program, which is helpful, but when you have leaders, it can vary dramatically, very similar to like an AA group, right? When you go to AA, you can have some groups that are very supportive and healing and really fit your vibe. And you can have some that are just a bunch of like old, upset curmudgeons, right? That are just complaining about the world or politics or whatever it is. So there's a lot of variety, but to answer your question directly, I think what makes a good men's group is honesty and experimentation. Right. And I'll kind of go into both of those. Right. So the first one is honesty. Right. And it's honesty. There's like kind of what you think about typical therapy honesty, which is you come in and you tell the truth in therapy. Right. You're honest about what you're going through, what you feel, good, bad, and ugly. Right. And especially with men in a group of men, our emotions are pretty intense. Right. Like we can have like homicidal or violent thoughts. Right. Like I have them. Sometimes I want to like kill or hurt people. I'm never going to do it, but we have that aggression in us. Our sexuality and lust can be really intense. Our fantasies can be really intense. The depth of our anger can be really intense. And talking about that stuff with other men that have also felt that is incredibly powerful. Because I think a lot of men, and this is true for my case and many of the guys I work with, we think that we're monsters or that we're villains or that we're selfish or we're narcissists or we're evil. Like there's so much of this discourse, especially in the modern era, right, around, men, and specifically white men, right, that we are like the enemies of planet Earth. So a lot of guys carry a lot of shame. So being able to be honest about that is critical, right? But then there's the other level of honesty, which is being honest as a member talking to the guy who's sharing. So I'll go into that because I think that's way more powerful because a lot of men, right, I do believe in male privilege, right? Like we live in a privileged world where guys, we're not getting a clear mirror. We're often being enabled a lot. We're often, having people are dancing around our feelings. They're not calling us out. They're not showing us our blind spots. So of course we grow up and we have a lot of rough edges, or we have these strategies that don't work. For some guys, it's, anger, temper tantrums. Mm-hmm. For some guys, it's drinking, for some guys, it's, avoidant behavior or nice guy behavior, right? Yeah. But no one ever calls us out because of our privilege. We're in this like weirdly like insulated place. Which, I think some people would say is like, a gift. But I think for a lot of men, it's actually really a burden to not have a clear mirror and to not know. Because I do think a evolved man or a man that's, self-actualized wants to know what's really going on and wants to get that clear mirror. So the power of a men's group is that you can get the honesty of another group of men who you respect that will call you out from a completely loving way. There's no bullying, there's no hazing. It's not like that. But it's like, hey, man, like you might be the asshole here. Or, hey, man, have you considered X, Y, and Z?
Yeah. I think men do need to be called out more and just people in general. And that's just such, we live in kind of a conflict avoidant society in a lot of ways. And it's fine to be diplomatic, but like the power of having a group of men together who are like, yeah, I'm going to call you out in a loving way. And it's because I care. And the context and the setting is such that, yeah, it's a safe experience, right? So that it's like everyone knows what's going on there. But I think that, Mark, that is a problem in our society. I speak for myself, like, a lot of the clients that I work with in my therapy practice have anger issues and they get away with it, right? Because it's like, oh, he's just a man and he's having, he's angry. And it's like, no, you're being a dick, It's like,
dick. Yeah, exactly.
It's like abusive, take care of it. And having the power of a group of like, are you having a temper tantrum? Can you express yourself in a better way? And just being checked like that. I think there's not a lot of men kind of checking each other. And so I think it's powerful what you're doing. And I wish that would happen more, especially amongst couples, where if they're able to call each other out on something, it's not an attack on the other person. It's like, hey, let me help you be a better person by giving you feedback. Like, that was a little out of bounds. You don't need to, throw furniture or something like that. Like it's not helpful,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's a temper tantrum, right? Like use your words kind of thing, right. And I think because men were not trained to do that, right? I think women are, naturally way more emotive and certainly conditioned to be way more emotive, right? Like they practice all the time. So for guys, we do have this kind of like primitive way of expressing ourselves. And the group, I talk about that second point, which is the experiential piece or experimentation, is like you get to practice that. So a lot of the guys that come to my, program are nice guys, which is like this idea of people pleasing for dudes, right? Where they're nice, they're always putting their needs on the back burner, but then it blows up in like a temper tantrum, or it's buried with a drug and alcohol problem, or porn addiction or whatever is really common. But that means that they suck at conflict, right? So when they do conflict, it is exactly what we're talking about. They're like throwing the thing across the room. They're breaking their phone. They're, huffing and puffing and retreating to the garage. They're throwing wrenches at the wall. Like they're just children. Yeah. So the men's group is a place to try out conflict in a healthy way. I liken it to like, a martial arts gym or a dojo or something where you can spar, you can actually practice with these other dudes. And we know that we're all good guys. We're all trying to get better at this. Sometimes maybe you hit someone too hard and you say, okay, ouch, like let's try again. But it's a place where you can build these skills, because I do think, getting back to kind of the male privilege idea, the burden of it that is also with the benefits of like, a lot of men are expected to be perfect and to really like know what they're doing all the time. So, especially when you call it, I don't know, 30, 35, right? People are like, okay, you're a man. Like you got to have everything figured out now. Yeah. So if you didn't learn something, like if you didn't learn how to communicate or how to fight or, how to, generate emotional intimacy, there isn't really a lot of places in the real world to practice that, to practice that without shame. So I think men's groups is really, really powerful, where you can be like, okay, yeah, I kind of suck at conflict. Let me practice it here so I can catch up and be the man that I want to be.
Right. Yeah. That is such a big problem I see also with men I work with, and frankly for myself too. Like I was trained to be conflict avoidant, either like in an aggressive way where I'm not dealing with the conflict, or people pleasing or things like that. It's just avoiding the conflict, so that if you can be in a group of men where he's like, hey, let's get into the conflict, because there's always going to be a conflict, and you don't have to look at it as like a battle. It's more of like, oh, how do we work out these differences here? Come to an accord on something and make it like a win-win kind of a thing. But so many men are like, okay, I'm going to use my anger as a defense here. I'm not going to address it, or I'm going to be, people please. I'm going to say yes, and then I'm going to let that resentment build over time, and then it's going to blow up, or I'm going to be checked out emotionally, or turn to some sort of a vice to avoid the conflict. So in these groups, is there times when it's maybe might have, say, like one member that's just not able to either be vulnerable or open up or bond or get into it? And if that happens, what do you do?
Yeah. So usually the group intervenes. So I actually just had this, called maybe 6 months ago in one of my groups. Yeah. So I have one client, and I won't disclose too much, but essentially he was a actor, right? Okay. Like a professional actor, worked on Broadway, and now he's transitioning to a different field of work, right? Okay. But because of that, he's very good at acting, and the group actually called him out on that he was, he was acting and he was emoting and he was being like a performance. So he was performing his emotions and performing, his truth, he was also performing being like, a good group member, a good therapy client. So he had like just enough vulnerability, but there was something very fake and performative about it. I had the privilege of seeing this guy also individually. So I had both views. I could see him acting in group as a defense mechanism, right? It's nothing malicious. But then an individual where he's more comfortable with me, he was telling me how he really felt about so-and-so, whatever is going on. So I could see kind of the duality of it as well. So as a therapist, I knew that there was a performance thing going on, right? So the group was able to call him out on that. And, what the truth was, again, it's hard truth, but it came from a loving place, is when he was doing this acting thing, right, and this performative thing, the guys were actually checking out. He was trying to get them to engage with him and trying to get them to be interested in him because he was like performative, right? But the real thing that was happening is that they were getting kind of bored and kind of sick and kind of like annoyed. So I think as men, or as humans even, right, like we do this a lot where we have a goal. We really want something to happen relationally, but sometimes the exact opposite is what happens. But if nobody tells you that, right, if nobody tells you that, you're going to keep doing the thing that doesn't work. Right. And then no wonder a lot of men end up feeling very lonely and disconnected and confused about their relationships, because they never got that feedback as to what they're doing is not actually working. It's not getting them what they want.
Yeah. So the group was able to call him out on this in a calm, loving, supportive way, or maybe even as confrontational, but like the power of that group. So I'm hoping that he responded in a way that helped him.
Oh, he did. He did.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it
great.
was hard for him to hear, right? But
Yeah,
like now he's like in and he presents completely differently. And
nice.
he is one of the most vulnerable group members, right? Now that
Yeah,
he knows kind of what the deal is, and he knows that the guys care about him, right?
yeah,
That they told him they were checking out because they respected him and they wanted to have a different experience with him, right? They
hmm,
didn't want to have their eyes glazed over every time he talked and did these like long
right,
monologues, right? They wanted
right.
to like actually know who he was.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, the group called him out. And of course, as the facilitator, like I nudged it, right? Like I'm watching the group members and I'm watching him go on these monologues and I'm watching the members like zone out or check
yeah,
something on their phone, right? Or
yeah,
whatever, right? And I think like that's the skill of the therapist and me, being uncomfortable myself of being like, hey, so and so, like I noticed that you're looking on your phone right now. Like what's going on?
right.
Right. Whereas I think a lot of group facilitators, they don't have the courage to call that out. They just kind of like let that stuff happen and they're checking out themselves. So
Yeah,
they get pulled into the same kind of like dynamic that's happening in the group. And they're like, oh my God, like this guy just needs to shut up. He's taking up too much time. Like I want to go back to something else.
right.
But as a group leader, like we have to be often the first ones to say that. And again, package it in a way that's palatable to these
Yeah,
guys. But if we're feeling it, it's likely other people in the group are feeling it as well.
right, right.
You know?
Yeah. The art of facilitation. It's so interesting because you want to let the group dynamics play out to a certain extent, and you don't want to be the problem solver. You want group members to chime in and sculpt things, but at the same time, you got to model that. You can't be like sitting there going, "God, I hope this guy shuts up," and no one's doing anything. It's like, wait, you're the facilitator. You got to speak up, right?
You got to say something. You got to say
Yeah,
something, right? And there's like a Sigmund Freud letter where he talks about like basically like the optimal level of frustration in
yeah,
therapy, right? Like
yes,
it has to be frustrating enough,
yep,
right, that people want to act and they actually breaks them out of their habits, right? They're kind of like repetitive, autonomous habits. But if it's too frustrating, kind of what you're saying, right?
right,
Everyone just shuts down. And then as a
yes,
leader, like you have to be mentally and emotionally strong enough to like break through that and make it a little bit easier for the members,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. I'm thinking about like athletics and training, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in a way, like men need to, not all men, but like retrain themselves in a lot of ways. Because I'll share like an experience I had when I was bike racing as a teenager. I was on this team, and me and this one guy in the team, we were kind of like both alphas in a way, but no one was calling us out on it. And so we called each other out on it and had this great long conversation where we just figured it out. And it was so powerful. I mean, I'm still thinking about it today, and I'm really good friends with this guy still. But there was this thing where we called each other out on our bullshit, and it was wonderful and such a transformative experience. But there was so much fear behind that confrontation, and I think that having a facilitator who's able to retrain like groups of men like that, because to do it on your own, oftentimes you don't do it. Um, and it's really hard to do on your own. But I'm wondering, like, do you think for men, is there, let's, I'm going to give you an example. Like, say, I'll give you sort of like a hypothetical client, and I want to make it a little challenging because this type of client might be daunting for me as well. So someone who's, let's say they're 50 and they've been a lifetime of practicing, I'll say some conflict avoidance. They drink a little too much. They're not like, they don't need to go to rehab, but they're using, say, alcohol as a way to not deal with their emotions. And let's call them also like people pleaser, Mr. Nice Guy. And they have regular angry outbursts. Call it intermittent explosive disorder. Remember that one?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's a real thing. And let's say there's a cycle, like every 3 months, they kind of, get an argument with their spouse, and they come to you, and actually, let's say that the wife sent them, like, here, check out Mark's group, right? And this guy's really resistant. Would you start this person out in individual therapy first, or do you think that they would be ready for the group? Like, what do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So my groups, they're small. We keep them at 6 people, and
yeah,
they're for guys that have been in therapy before specifically.
Okay.
right? So if this particular client had never been in therapy, we would start them
Yes.
in individual.
Yeah. Right.
And the way that I work and the way that my companies run is that the goal of individual really is to prepare you for group, But like a guy needs to go through some of that, classical therapy stuff, knows his trauma, his past, his history, like why he is who he is. And I think group is actually not good for that. Because you create that kind of monopolizing thing that you and I were chatting about, where this guy's going through all these like epiphanies of like, oh my God, it's my childhood trauma and I was abused and all this stuff, and like the other guys are like, yeah, like we already know that. They've already processed that to some extent.
Right. Right.
For me, the group is more about like, okay, you know who you are, but now you want to get better, right? And you want to have a group of dudes that will hold you accountable to improving your life.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. I think there are too many groups out there where they just kind of join the group, and it's like, unless you do have some of that self-awareness and really understanding your psychology, at least to a certain extent, you could dominate the group, and it could have the wrong effect there. Yeah.
And maybe talk about how to work with him individually if you're interested in that.
Yeah, I'd be curious. Yeah, what would be your approach? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, we get a lot of these guys, right, that come in that are the nice guy that have, the intermittent anger outbursts and, have a drinking problem or whatever, right? And like their wife makes them come. That's very, very common, So I find for a lot of these guys, like I have this framework that I use, right? So it's from villain to victim to hero to guide, right? Okay. So a lot of these guys come in feeling like the villain, right? Their wife basically says, like, gives them an ultimatum, you need to go to therapy or you're getting a divorce. That happens all the time, right? Or you're the problem, you're a narcissist, you're selfish, you've never loved me, right? They have this like giant fight, usually over the holidays or whatever, when their kids leave the house. And it's like, you need to go to therapy because you're a shitty husband and you're a shitty father. And like, I hate you, right? It's like very charged. Yeah. And then of course, if someone's talking to you that way, you're coming to therapy being like, one, her, right? Like I want to stay married, but like I'm really, really mad at my wife, but I feel like I can't get mad, right? And they're bathing in shame, right? They're bathing in shame because on some level they're like, oh, maybe she's right. Maybe I did fail at being a husband and a father and a man, So the first thing, right, is they come in as a villain. The first thing is to hear their thing and move them to feeling like a victim. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think typical therapy starts and ends, where it's like, okay, you're doing these shitty things, but it's because of your childhood trauma. It's because of your conditioning. It's because of whatever, right? It's because you weren't trained, by your parents growing up, and I think a lot of therapy fails men because men don't want to be victims, right? But a lot of therapy just starts and ends there. Mm-hmm. So a guy will, they'll get something out of that for a while because it's like, okay, the shame is starting to get dissipated. They're starting to feel like they're not that much of an asshole. They're starting to feel like a victim. And then they bring that to their wife and it works because the wife just wants more like emotional honesty. So when the, husband's talking about his childhood and the abuse and all that, like the wife feels closer to him and he's, maybe she's hearing stories she never heard for, her whole life. Right. And it works. But then the guy starts to feel really icky and he's like, oh, I'm coming to therapy and it's just like a pity party. Like I have all these good reasons for why I'm an asshole, but like now I know that I'm still kind of an asshole, right? Right. So the work of therapy, and I think this is where the masculine comes in. So I should back up. I think the victim stuff and the like compassion is feminine energy, which a lot of men need. They need that like warm, compassionate, feminine energy. But then you have to bring in the masculine, which is the hero, right? Going from victim to hero, which is the idea of like, okay, now you know this about yourself. What are you going to do about it? Right? How are you going to turn that pain into a superpower? How are you going to become an even better husband? How are you going to become an even better father? How are you going to use what you've learned and really start to change your behavior? And I find that a lot of therapists really shy away from this, right? We're taught not to give advice. We're taught not to like tell our patients what to do. We're taught not to like challenge them, like just to have that unconditional positive regard. But these guys need that challenge and they need that accountability. So they don't get stuck in victimhood, and that often looks like, again, calling them out, presenting those kind of harsh truths or those clear mirrors from, a compassionate place, but coaching, right? And we talk about, sports and everything. It's like being like, like your pitch sucks, right? Like, I'm not going to bully you for that. I'm going to teach you how to pitch better. But like, here's some mechanics that I'm seeing from an outside perspective about why your pitch is too slow or it goes to the left or whatever, right? And like, I'm going to help you really dial that in. And then the last phase, which is not for all guys, because a lot of guys say, they're busy, I live their life, is going to a guide, Right. And that is often that means joining a men's group, right? Where they can both, get that attention, but also provide that call out and that mirror to
Yeah.
other men, right? Or participating in a retreat or becoming a therapist or, some guys guide by mentoring in their companies, right? Or being a father is a great way that you can be a guide. It doesn't have to be in like a therapy setting, but
Hmm.
really being like, okay, now that I've done this for myself, I now want to do this for other people.
Right. I love that. So let's follow this again. So it's going from villain,
Yep.
you get called, there's some sort of conflict in your life, right? To victim, meaning
Mhm.
you get insight into why you are doing these behaviors. Oh, it's not my fault. I was sort of learned this through society or my parents or whatever. And that can be powerful. But like you're saying, if you get stuck in that more therapeutic victim, life is hard. I need to be more sensitive. Like if you get stuck there and you don't challenge them to go to, like you say,
Yeah.
the hero phase is next, right? You're saying?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
If you don't challenge the man to do this, and I mean maybe this can work with women as well. Like I think there's that that, but more so for a guy. We're just talking about men's therapy here, right? So
Mhm.
it's like okay, so if as a therapist, if you don't challenge that innate kind of I would say masculine energy or desire to be creative and be a hero in a lot of ways, right? If you don't push them in that direction, that's kind of a disservice. And
Yes.
and I resonate with your style because I feel the same way. When I work with my clients, I like to challenge them. It's like, okay, you have all this insight. You have, you're feeling more connected to your wife or whatever. And now what? What's the next step? What do you want to do? Because you like doing stuff, like you like being active, and like, how can we do that? And then you're saying, after they're really engaged in being proactive and doing things, then you get them into the guide phase. You said that like that's the next one
Yep.
after that.
Yes.
So it's kind of like being part of a tribe of guys in a way. Like, how can I mentor somebody? How can I be a leader? So that I'm modeling this, which is probably going to reinforce my good habits at the same time. Because if I'm modeling it, I'm not going to be acting like a jerk. I've got to uphold this standard. I love that trajectory. I think that's for people watching, listening, like take notes on that. So again, it's villain to victim to hero to guide. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah,
You got
that's
it.
awesome. Now, is there a level like above guide, like Jedi Master or something, or like
Yeah,
how does
like
that work?
Yoda
Yeah.
level.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's when you go back to school to become a therapist, right?
Right. Right.
But no, I mean, I think for most men, maybe all men, like guide is it. Like
Yeah.
I think, and I think our culture is moving this way. I have to give it credit, but I do think like being a father and being a
Mm,
mentor is becoming cool again. And I
mm,
do think like in many ways that's the most masculine thing you can do, right?
yeah.
Is like be in that kind of king energy, use a lot of, this
Mm,
kind of archetypal Jungian
yeah.
stuff, right? Or,
Right.
be a leader at work or be, a dad or a coach on someone's like soccer team, right? Like
Right.
I think there's something
Right.
very masculine about that.
Yeah.
And to kind of bring it back to what we talked about in the beginning of our episode, right? I think the world needs that. The world needs a lot of male guides.
Yeah.
Young men today need like older men that are not just successful financially, right,
Mm,
and logistically and physically, but that are emotionally and spiritually and mentally successful,
yeah.
right, to help shepherd the new generation and
Yeah.
let them know that like it's okay and actually great to be a man,
Yeah.
and it does look different from being a woman, but you can be a very honorable man and a very emotional man and a very
Yeah.
powerful man that doesn't
Right.
have to rely on aggression and intimidation and domination.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. This is great. It makes me think of like I did a little bit of coaching for a bicycling team.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And they were juniors, they were high school students, and I really loved it. And you're making me want to get back to it because there was something about just being that guide. I was in the guide mode and just had these great, powerful experiences where I was able to help kids through frustration. And it reinforced my own kind of identity as a man too, of like, hey, I can share my wisdom and knowledge and I'm being this role model so that my identity is such like I need to act in a certain way. Like
Mhm.
I'm a model for these guys. I think that's powerful. And I think that if every man can have some sort of a role in their life, like you say, either father or coach or something like that, where you are in that guide mode after you've been through your journey and you get your shit together, right? So like, not that anyone has their act together completely, but that guide mode, I like that as kind of like the final. maintenance mode for your life. I love that.
Totally. Like I said, I think it holds yourself to a higher standard because you know
Yeah.
that people are watching, right? Young men
Yeah.
specifically in this example
Right.
are watching,
Right.
I think it lets you practice masculine love, which kind of my definition of that is both setting a challenge and then coaching the person to reach that challenge,
Yep.
you know?
Yep.
And I think a lot of our dads, and my dad is like this, right? Like they just set challenges, right? Or
Yeah.
it's like, hey, do this. But there
Right.
wasn't a lot of guidance, right, on how to
Right.
actually get there. And there wasn't a lot of that emotional work. Like you said, if you're, setting a challenge for a kid, I don't know enough about biking, but you're saying, hey, you're going to do X miles a day,
Yep.
right? And then you disappear and you show up
Yep.
at the end of the day and you're like, did you
Right.
do X miles? And the kid's like,
Yeah.
no. That's not effective coaching. You got to ride alongside them. You got to be there for when they give up. You have to set the pace, right? If you're like biking in front of them,
Right.
like you need a lot of that interaction and relationship. And I
Yeah.
think, again, men and masculine people more so, we bond over overcoming challenges together,
Yep.
you know? So like if you're that guide and you're helping that kid, you're doing that, whatever it is, 20-mile ride together and you're going through the terrain and, God forbid he falls off the bike and you pick him up and you move forward. Like at the end of that, you're going to be so much closer to that other man than if you were to just like disappear, right? And then judge him for not, completing the race or whatever, right? Like I think that's what a lot of men are missing is those real like masculine connections and those moments of masculine love,
Yeah. Yeah. And oftentimes maybe we never had that structure when we were growing up.
Right.
But to be able to be that guide, again, you reinforce that within yourself too. And it can be, just a real healing experience for the guide. And it's a win-win because you're helping someone else at the same time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So just in respect for time here, I know you got to get going here, but I did want to ask you, like, how can people find out more about men's therapy online? Like, where should they go?
Sure. Yeah. So everything's on the website. It's menstherapy.online. Our name of the company is Men's Therapy Online. It's really good for SEO because people just Google Men's Therapy Online. But everything's there. We have our own podcast. Michael will be on our podcast, so you can check out an episode with him as well. We're kind of doing a trade. We got a blog that I put out every week. We got and then all of our services and stuff are on there, right? The groups, individual, the retreat, all that's on there. But I encourage you to just check it out. There's a ton of free shit on there because really the goal is to break down the stigma of men getting into treatment and to make it that hero's journey, that thing I was talking about before, and not being at a place of weakness, not being like, okay, I'm an addict or I'm crazy is why I got to go to therapy, but being like, I want to take my life and my mental and emotional health seriously. Just like how you'd get a coach or a personal trainer because you want to take your physical health seriously. Right. We're a way of taking your mental life and your relational and emotional health seriously. So check us out. We give out a lot of stuff for free. And if you want to work with us, all the information is on the website, which is menstherapy.online.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. When I first found your site, I was just Googling men's therapy to see if I showed up in SEO searches. And you came up. It's like menstherapy.online. That's great. Great. I found you. And I encourage people
very
to check
tactical.
out yeah. Everyone should check out the website, menstherapy.online, because it's unique. It's a different take on your traditional therapy website. Like it's manly. I don't know how to explain it, but it's very engaging. And I think what the work that you're doing, Mark, is great. And I'm happy we talked today and connected. I think it's a great conversation. It's going to be helpful for a lot of people listening. So
thank you. Yeah. Looking forward to continuing the conversation with you too.
Definitely. Okay. Thanks, Mark.